In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how I play Vince, also known as the shotgun. And in my opinion, one of the reasons why you should consider playing Vince is because he really is one of the most fun classes in the game. You have the disadvantage of not having as much range as the other classes, so you have to rely more on your pistol, and it forces you to switch between different weapons in different situations, and it also forces you to play a little bit more strategically. He is very rage-inducing to opponents, and surprisingly, I get more people complaining about Vince than when I play other classes. So that's just something to keep in mind, but that shouldn't stop you from playing him. So I really think that Vince appeals to the type of player who enjoys using shotguns in other games and really gets a thrill out of a close quarter combat instead of things like sniping. You have the ability to one-shot anyone at close range, which is really satisfying. So if the shotgun's your thing, then you definitely should give Vince a try. If you're familiar with TF2, naturally Vince is going to feel like the scout, where you just kind of run up to people and blast them. And if you play Apex Legends and you're the type of player that likes to use the Peacekeeper, then Vince will fit in right with you. And in Fortnite, the current meta is that you should always be carrying a pump, and Vince feels a little bit like that just due to his ability to one-shot people and have to switch weapons frequently. The first thing to take a look at is going to be his damage. So each pellet actually does 50 damage, so quite a lot. But you can see that the pellets have a very high spread. So you're very unlikely to hit all of the 5 pellets. But if you do, that's theoretically 250 damage. So as you can see there, relatively close to him, but not super close. I was able to aim down sights for a tight spread and blast him. The clip size is only 2 rounds, so you have to be very conservative. You have to have good trigger control in terms of when to shoot. And Vince has an ability to equip a secondary weapon, which is going to be very important for this class in particular. And then lastly, his movement speed and health is just about average. He moves about as fast as the Trigger Man and also has 100 health, just like the Trigger Man. What are some of Vince's strengths? First of all, Vince has the ability to one-shot any class at close range, which is huge because not every class in the game has a one-shot, and it allows you to win even battles where you're initially losing. Vince is also good against other close range classes. There's not a whole lot of dedicated close range classes in the game. There's the Agent and there's the Rocketeer. So against the Rocketeer has to be very careful that he doesn't shoot himself and take splash damage. So that forces him to have kind of a moderate spacing. And therefore, in those super close range fights, you should come out ahead against the Rocketeer. And the Agent is only effective at very close range, but the Agent cannot one-shot you, whereas you can one-shot the Agent. So you win in that situation as well. So moving on to Vince's weaknesses, which I think is actually the more important thing to discuss about Vince compared to some of the other classes. The first weakness is that Vince does not do well in all game modes. So Vince has a pretty hard time in team deathmatch, and there are situations where there are 2 or 3 guys bunched up, and unless you quickly one-shot one guy and then quickly one-shot the other guy, you have to switch weapons or you have to reload. Whereas if you're using a class like the Trigger Man, you're actually able to win those 1 vs 2 battles a bit more easily and simply spray them down. One of Vince's weaknesses is that he's either underpowered or even against a lot of the matchups in the game. He in particular has trouble against classes that excel at all ranges, such as Trigger Man, Hunter, and Detective. I think Hunter in particular, Vince has trouble with because even at close range when you're 1 vs 1ing a Hunter, the Hunter still has the ability to one-shot you, and at medium and close range, you don't have quite as much of a chance. So now that we've pointed out some of these obvious weaknesses of Vince, let's talk about a few tips on how you can actually succeed with him and why it's actually worth investing time into playing Vince. First thing to talk about is going to be the choice of loadout when it comes to Vince. So in my other video where I talked about the Trigger Man, I talked about how it doesn't really matter if you use the pistol or the deagle. I think Vince is an exception where it's very important to have the deagle. I mean, you can still succeed with a pistol, but the thing about the deagle is that it really helps make up for the weaknesses that you have in a lot of the matchups, and it really covers you at long range and medium range. For example, if I'm going up against a hunter down like a long sight line, I can preemptively pull out my deagle and have a chance to win that fight by landing a headshot. I wouldn't go so far to say that you shouldn't play Vince unless you have the deagle, but I feel that Vince certainly gets stronger once you unlock the deagle at level 15. In my opinion, Vince is the most effective in the free-for-all game mode, and that's because you can kind of pick and choose your fights. People are kind of fighting each other, so that allows you to take your time and get up really close to people and kind of like third-party them. And then you can just kind of hop around the map with your shotgun out and mow people down. And I actually think that Vince is top tier when it comes to free-for-all. The other game mode that you can consider using Vince is going to be in hardpoint mode. I can kind of stand on the point and camp it out. If I have a set line like this, I can preemptively pull out the deagle. Or, you know, if I'm just hiding, I can just literally hide on the point. This is not a good situation because I don't have cover. But you can imagine that on other points that you have a lot of cover, you can just kind of hide in the corner and blast people down when they get close. You need to know your effective range. It's a little bit further range than you would think in terms of your shotgun spread, and you can even test out the spread just on a wall to see like how far the pellets actually spread apart. But you need to know your effective range, and you do not want to be taking fights if you're not in that effective range. So there are two types of movements that you need to master when you're playing as Vince. The first is going to be the dodging movements, so that's moving left and right in an unpredictable way to make yourself harder to hit when you're in the middle of a fight or someone's trying to aim at you. So that's probably most important. The second is going to be closing the gap. So if I see an enemy far away, I want to be jumping, sliding, doing whatever I can to get closer to them really quickly so I can be within that effective range. Now, the thing to keep in mind is when you're closing the gap, you're going to be moving in a very straight line. And if they're looking at you, that's not always the best thing to do. So you need to be switching constantly between the movement about closing the gap and then dodging left and right and knowing when to duck behind cover. The next thing you need to learn how to do with Vince is figure out exactly where you should be aiming. So similar to other FPS games, there's kind of this idea that if you have a shotgun where you have pellets that spread out, where do you aim? Do you aim for the body? Do you go for body shots? Or do you go for the headshot? Well, there is this headshot bonus multiplier in this game. It's not as intense as some other games. It's about 1/3. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that in public lobbies, there is a points bonus for landing headshots. I actually find a good compromise to be aiming for the neck. And that's because if you aim only for the head, some of the pellets are going to spread above the head and miss the target. And if you aim for the neck, some of the pellets are going to hit the neck, and some of the pellets are also going to hit the head, therefore maximizing your damage. The official client available on PC has a new section called Utilities, and that allows you to configure a custom crosshair. And although I typically don't play with custom crosshairs on because I think that it's not completely necessary, I think it's more important for a class like Vince. When you're not using the custom crosshair, you're aiming down iron sights, and you can see that the tip of the iron sight actually doesn't quite line up with the middle of the spread. So compared to other classes, Vince has greater benefit from using this custom crosshair feature, and it's also going to be easier to aim using the pistol or the deagle when you are using the custom crosshair. The last tip for succeeding at Vince is really mastering the art of weapon switching. And ideally, you want to actually have the correct weapon out even before you're engaging in the fight, but you also have to be very comfortable switching in between fights. So as a general rule of thumb, for the most part, I like to have the shotgun out first, and if I run out of bullets from the shotgun, then I'll switch out to the pistol or the deagle to finish them off. I think that Vince really gives a nice variation to the gameplay experience of Krunker, and is therefore a very important class. And if you get bored of playing the Hunter every time, then I really encourage you to give Vince a try. Overall, I would put Vince right in the middle of the tier list, or perhaps even lower, but despite this, I currently think that every single class in the game is viable to dominate public lobbies. So that's all. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you do, please like and subscribe.